Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikes-Kara. Welcome back, my friends. For those of you who have just found our little slice of the podcast world, the Maker's Playbook airs 3 out of every 4 weeks. On that 4th week, which was last week, I share my top photography tips for ceramicists and other makers on my email insiders list. If you missed out on last week's tips, I shared my top 6 things to consider when buying a camera or upgrading your existing camera equipment. If you missed out, shoot me an email at rebecca@makers-playbook.com. That's Rebecca with 1 B and 2 C's, REBECCA at makers-playbook.com, and I will gladly send you those tips. This week, we have our first non-potter. I know, shocker. Tom Corneill is a musician and a writer who started a band called Young Martyrs and recorded an entire album all amidst the craziness that 2020 threw at us. Tom also happens to be married to Cara Lee Ford, who I had the opportunity to chat with on episode 103. So he's kind of pottery adjacent and can fully appreciate the insanity that all of us experience at the holiday time with shipping and packaging. My friends, Tom and I do not hold back. We talk about the struggles of mental health, particularly in being self-employed or trying to create and put things out into the world. We talk about identity and how maybe the goals we don't achieve are just signs that they were the wrong goals. We share how we both are coming back to being true to ourselves, and we battle the worst case scenario what-ifs that plague anyone's brain before starting a new venture. Yeah, like I said, it's a lot. And eventually, as long as you listen all the way to the end, we do finally talk about the band. So, enough for me. Let's dig in. Hey, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rebecca. It's great to be here.
I am excited to have one of our first non-potters here. We're changing it up this time.
Wow, that feels like a lot of pressure. I'll try to be entertaining and or interesting or something for you.
Well, I mean, you're Potter adjacent a little bit, I feel like, given that you're married to Cara.
Listen, I mean, she perhaps wouldn't tell you this, but basically all the good work that comes out of her studio, most of that is me. She plays a very small part.
You can't even finish that sentence.
She's going to kill me. No, I make the cups of tea. That's about all I'm good for. I don't get involved otherwise.
Those are very important, though. Those are very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I give the hugs, and I do the post office runs and some of the important but unskilled jobs. I try and help where I can, but no, my hands never go near that wheel.
Well, I think every single one of us dreams of packaging assistants and little postal minions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. I don't know about you, but at Christmas in particular, it's so funny how I end up helping out more because there's a lot more stuff to package. And I really begin to embody the life of an elf. I don't know that there is any job that could be more like Santa's workshop than being in the pottery workshop at Christmas, which is... It's fun. I love it. It's great. I just try really hard not to get things wrong, wrap it up wrong, or put the wrong name on something. So far, no major disasters. So I've been invited back for next year. So that's great.
Lucky you. Well, for those that don't know, give us the 3,000-foot view, how you would introduce yourself to somebody meeting you for the first time.
I should have rehearsed this bit, I guess. My name is Tom Corneill. I am a musician and a writer. I am one quarter of a band called Young Martyrs. I'm currently writing a book about the last 10 years of my life. And I also, when I'm not doing either of those things, I co-host a podcast called the Everyday Problems Podcast. That's kind of me.
Fantastic. I didn't know about the book. I think I vaguely remember Cara mentioning the podcast. That launched a little while ago now, right?
Yeah, it was last year. Myself and a friend. I mean, do you want me to talk a tiny bit about what it is and when it started?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, it's nice coming on to your brilliant podcast and getting a minute to talk about mine. Thank you for that. That's lovely. So myself and a now friend, he was a stranger at the time, were put in touch with each other maybe 2 years ago. I was going through a bit of a tough time with depression, but I had a friend at the place where I worked and who we were always really good at talking quite openly about stuff. And she said that her partner was also going through a bit of a dip, but since I found it quite easy to talk about and he loves to chat as well, why don't we get together for a coffee? And it was the strangest blind date that you could imagine. Two guys that don't know each other going to meet each other in a place neither of us had been to, that's by the by, but to talk probably about depression for a bit over a coffee. That felt really weird, but
super casual subject, no big deal. Yeah,
I know. When I say that out loud now, it seems even weirder than it felt at the time. To be honest, it felt really natural, and we just Liam and I got on really well. He's very eloquent. I can't speak for me, but he certainly is. He's very good at articulating the way that he feels, and actually we both found that we felt so much better after the conversation. I'd had half a thought about maybe doing a podcast about mental health because it's something, after a few years of particular challenges with depression and stress, I was thinking about maybe I should do more in that area. And when I mentioned it to him, I said, why don't we just record our next conversation? So we did, but it took, we recorded it like 18 months ago, but having the confidence and being organized enough to actually bring that together took maybe 6 months. So I think by the time we aired that first conversation that we'd recorded, which was the second time we'd ever met, it was like 6 months afterwards. But then we kept it regular. We got some guests involved. We branched out a little bit. The intention behind it was always to try and talk openly and sincerely, and as much as possible to look on the bright side and on the side of solutions or ideas or ways that we find around stuff that we've had challenges with, and to be honest about our moods. And that's kind of what we tried to do. So if it sounds depressing, it's the Everyday Problems podcast. It's about mental health. It did come together as a result of two people suffering with depression, but I think if you listen to it, you'll probably find it a lot more upbeat, and it's quite often it's funny. There's usually a story of hope and motivation that comes through each episode. So yeah, that's what we get up to. Sorry for giving, that was an accidental bit of a sell for the podcast on your podcast.
All good. I think the subject is incredibly important, and also normalizing those conversations, particularly maybe, I don't even know, I was going to generalize and say maybe women talk about this more, but not men. But I don't even know if that's true. I think in general, just normalizing, hey, how are we honestly feeling? What do you really need to feel better if that's the case? And what's that actually look like, rather than just glossing over or chalking it up to something, or just pull yourself together and get over it. Like that, that's not always that helpful.
Yeah, do you know what? I think you just made a really great point there. I think that we talk as the planet, really, we're coming around to the fact that we don't talk enough about mental health in a way that is normal and comfortable, if we talk about it at all. And I think it's probably fair to say that, and this is a generalization, there are clearly exceptions to the rule, but I think it's fair to say that men on the whole talk about it dangerously little. But what's really important to me is the problem definitely doesn't stop with men. I think it might be true to say that women possibly more open about talking about their feelings, but whether they really go deeply enough into feelings right through to the serious underlying nature of their moods, and not just, I'm sure these conversations do take place, but what I'm trying to say, not very articulately, is that I think most of us could do more to be honest about our kind of long-term well-being. I don't think it's exclusive to men. So it's a really good question, and I would encourage all people to, talk a little bit more about it.
We jumped on thinking we're going to talk about the band, and we'll get there. We'll totally get there. As far as for our creatives who are like, hold on a second, I want to hear about making something. But for all of us who are making a living from the things we make, like mindset and our mental health are huge factors into Just even having the guts or the thickness of our skin to be able to put out in the world something you've made with your heart and your soul, and being like, does somebody love this as much as I do and want to buy it from me? That takes grit and stamina and like mental strength.
Absolutely. Obviously, living with Cara, I watch her process all the time. We naturally talk all the time. We're talking more than ever because we're locked in together right now. Such is the planet that we live on right now. But I really get to see behind the scenes. And while just stepping back from myself for a moment and talking about another maker, I mean, when you see she posts these amazing videos about how she makes things, and these great sped up collages of her working around the studio and making these pots come together, and she presents herself really well, and that really is absolutely her. But behind that, there's a real person who has doubts about, what if this thing that I'm making turns out to not be popular? Or a really common one would be, what if this stuff breaks before it gets to the recipient? Or what if I've just switched to a new glaze and it looks beautiful and I've tested the hell out of it, but what if in, I don't know, 5-6 months time, when it's way out of my hands, what if then it crazes in a way that the customer wouldn't want it to, or something like that? She has real, like any artist, has insecurities about that. And I think there's very few people in life that don't have insecurities. From my point of view, I think when it's come to the music, it's taken me years. I've been in bands since I was 15, maybe 14. And I'm 37 now. So that's most of my life. I've been in bands and I've been making music. But I've been on a real journey over the last decade or so, maybe 15 years, of my confidence being really high and then coming right back down for a very long time. It didn't stop me making music, but it definitely changed the way that I felt comfortable putting myself out there and marketing myself. I really took a big dip in confidence. And I've had to really find that again with Young Martyrs. It's the music that I'm making now. I'm super, super happy with it, but you can't just be happy with the music if you're a creative person, as you know very well. You've also got to find it in yourself to be your own promoter. And that takes
it sucks.
yeah, because we didn't get put to be necessarily put on a pedestal. I think there's a misconception that if you're an artist of any kind, that you're really good at accepting attention. That's not true. Even I, who can stand up in front of people and sing, and I love it when I'm up there doing it, I'm great while I'm singing the songs because I've got a purpose up there, but I don't like standing in a room and saying, right, everybody, now it's time to look at me. That's not me. When I'm not on stage, I think I'm pretty introverted, actually. Yeah.
It's like Beyonce would someone who everybody looks at now as being this force to be reckoned with, right? Talks about how she would put on the facade of, she gave herself another name when she would go on stage. She would call herself Sasha Fierce.
Yeah.
Because she needed this cloak, if you will, of like, okay, I can pretend to be another person and behave this way on a stage, but if it's me being that way, then that's it. I don't think she does that anymore, but just to get going, that's a very real thing for people, millions, billions around the world know and love and would never imagine that was the case.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And I am often referred to as the British Beyonce. I'm sure you knew that already.
It was in my notes. It was definitely in my notes.
But no, I think that is a really good point. And actually, that feeds into how Young Martyrs came about, really. I'm at a point in my life where at the start of last year, big changes happened for me even before there was a global pandemic. I walked away from a career, 10 years in the same job and a similar job before that for a couple of years. So it's like a 12-year career in a very corporate industry. And I'd come so far away from I didn't hate it all. There was lots of good times. There was lots of great development, lots of good lessons, loads and loads of good people, mostly good people, and some really good times. But I'd gotten so far away from who I was. I only went for an interview because I needed to pay the bills, like back when I was in my 20s. And then one thing led to another. Next minute, it's 12 years later. And I tried so hard to fit into a culture that I was able to fit into, but it wasn't me. I'd made myself look a certain way. I dressed for this job. I spent so much time as this other person, minding my manners, acting a certain way. I was spending more of my waking hours doing that than anything else. And so even how I cut my hair became part of the job, and the clothes I was wearing in my spare time was... I felt this real disconnect between who I was 9 to 5. I say 9 to 5 because that's what we say, but it wasn't that. It was most of my waking hours through the week and sometimes at the weekend as well, that I couldn't just put that outfit away and suddenly become the other guy because they were becoming so different. It was really tailoring the way that I behaved and the way I looked, and I wasn't me anymore. When I put that away, I walked away from that. I'd been making a massive effort to be more me over the last few years. And the kind of icing on the cake really was I had this bunch of songs that I'd been writing over 15 years, and I'd just written a couple of new ones. They didn't fit any of the bands I was in during that time. They didn't fit Centerfolds, a band I was in previously for quite a long time. They were the most honestly me songs that I'd written for a really long time. I wasn't writing to fit a particular scene or a particular audience or to please anybody else. It was just the most honest I could be. They were very personal songs. And I said to a bunch of friends who are also brilliant musicians, look, guys, do you fancy making these songs come to life with me? I need help making them sound like they do in my head. And they were up for it. And I really just wanted to have a jam and see what happened. And 6 months later, we had an album recorded, and now we're chasing our tails because we didn't know, we didn't realize how much was going to come together, how quickly. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but it sounds fantastic. I guess I can say that.
I think we have to be more proud of our work. So absolutely, 1000%.
Well, I'm not the only person. I'm just one of the guys. So I can say everyone else on there was phenomenal. And the studio, Seb in Defra Studio here in Frome in Somerset, made it sound absolutely amazing. And we didn't know this was going to happen. So the mission was really just to write and play some honest music and just really be a honest self-expression. That's all I wanted out of it. And the guys totally understood that. So that's what we did.
That's amazing. Isn't it funny how once you get in alignment, so to speak, not to be too woo about it, but at least what I'm finding over this past year, like once you actually get honest with yourself and say, who am I? And these are going to sound like way bigger questions. And I don't know that maybe I did have that big of a come to Jesus moment, if you will. But once you really look into it and go, right, the clothes, even the surface level stuff, the way I like to wear my hair, the clothes that I like to wear, the music I like to listen to, here's what it actually is. And then once we get honest with ourselves and start practicing that in our lives, how quickly the things start to line up and things start to happen. And there's a momentum that starts coming, at least what I've found over this last year and what it sounds like you found too, that it's kind of like, oh, this is why all those other goals were so hard. They weren't the right ones for me.
You just totally hit the nail on the head for me. That is what it's all about for me. That so I was in the investments industry, and for 12 years, that's the job that I was doing. I mean, there were bits of it that I really did enjoy. There was a period of several years when I can remember saying and meaning, I love my job. And I really did. There was a brief period where the balance between the things that I was doing, the people I was working with, the free time that I still had outside of work where I was making music, it was just right. It just worked, and the wages were good. And it was a point in my life where I needed that. We were starting to build a home, and I don't mean literally, but to make a home for ourselves. We got married, and we were growing up and getting real cars and stuff like that. And I really did for a period. I loved it, but it didn't last. And in that time, or certainly the years that followed, I'd never had any financial qualifications, and so I thought I should. I'm at a level now. I was managing people. It wasn't required of me in my job, but I was starting to feel like a bit of a fraud. I didn't have anything to my name, and I'm not entirely sure that qualifications in an exam setting are necessarily all they're cut up to. That's a whole other subject I could riff on. I have a feeling you and I are going to feel quite similar about this.
We're going to table that for a different conversation and maybe over virtual cocktails.
That sounds good. But in the meantime, I was trying to do these exams. I took, I think, 4 or 5 financial exams, and I failed every single one of them. And I had been in the industry by this point for years, and I had a very responsible job. I was well paid. I cared about the job that I did, but that industry, it wasn't for me. There's people who it really suits, and the world needs those people. And I'm friends with some of those people, and absolutely, that is wonderful. That's probably important, while you and I are talking about how important it is for some of us to recognize your identity and the importance of living an authentic version of yourself. There are people for whom I guess maybe it's that their identity is closer to the job that they're doing, even if it is a regular 9-to-5, should I say, less creative job. For whatever reason, it suits them, and that's great, and that's wonderful. And I wish I could have been one of those people.
I am very grateful for the people who feel that way about accounting, for example. We need those people.
Absolutely right. They make the world go round. It just wasn't me. I was pursuing these goals, and they were hard because they were the wrong goals for me. They didn't mean anything. I had been singing, playing guitar. I've been playing guitar since before I knew how to play the guitar. I would take my dad's old thing out of the loft and make noises out of it and hope that some kind of new decent sounds would come out of it, and they didn't. But I knew what I wanted to do. I for a long time said I really envy people who, when they're young, know exactly what they want to do, and they go and they study that thing, and they then become that thing. And I was always so envious of those people. It only dawned on me recently that actually I was one of those people the whole time. I just didn't believe for a very long time that it was possible to do the thing that I wanted to do. So I stopped pursuing it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that opens up a lot. I might need to sit on that for myself for a minute, because there's so many. My brain is going in multiple different directions here. Because on the one hand, I also find that for those of us that maybe, and it's not that we completely fell away from ourselves. We weren't becoming Scrooge or something, okay? But just, it is interesting as you kind of pivot and come back to something where you start to feel more at home in yourself, that it does remind me of things of being a kid. Yeah. That simplicity and for the last 10 plus years, I've been in the wedding industry here in Chicago and frankly all over the world, and incredible, stunning, beautiful events, wonderful people.
Yeah.
But also, I didn't grow up on the farm, but I identified it with it because my mom grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Illinois. And getting back into the ceramics world, where some of the most famous ceramicists on the planet are in Nowheresville, Midwest, USA, or completely outside of the city in like 2 hours outside of Sydney in Australia, or places where you didn't have to be seen and be seen, basically. And going, oh, yeah, this is... Now, don't get me wrong, I can get down for getting all dolled up for a black tie event, but it's one extreme or the other, right? Like I either want no makeup and mud in my hair or ball gown.
Listen, I'm totally with you. I'm absolutely with you. And for a long time, like you say, it wasn't that I totally had an out-of-body experience for 12 years. I was still in there. And also, I'm sure you would agree, while you're going through a period like that, it's so important in so many ways. There's so many lessons that I'm sure we were meant to learn from it. There's so many blessings that we're given by those periods that we possibly couldn't do what we do now if we hadn't gone through those things. So I've got a lot to be grateful for in the years that I spent doing things that I didn't enjoy. And I think that's been an important part of the adventure as well, really, is when I hit about 30, I was falling out with myself for being a bit of a rebel in my youth and for taking a long time to calm down. and settle down and seek an inverted commas proper job. And I really didn't want to give up my independence and my free thinking. And I was thinking of all of these things as I reached my early 30s as a negative. And I was not grateful to the young guy that I was. And then similarly, when I was approaching the end of what I knew would become the end of my career investments, I was falling out with the guy that had been doing that job for the last decade and thinking, what were you doing? That wasn't what you were meant to do. But the reality is, I don't know how you feel about fate. I have conversations with myself about that all the time. But there's a great Beatles lyric, there's nowhere you can be that isn't where you're meant to be. And I've really come to believe that I was meant to be all of those people that happened before. That's whatever I did got me where I am now. Each step that you take is the step that is necessary to get to the next step. And so a lot of self-forgiveness had to go on, an acceptance of the misspent 12 years of the job that I did, and it's time to be grateful for that. The great news is there's all this time left to go and do the things that really matter, make music. And
when you wouldn't have ever written the songs that you wrote if you hadn't. I don't know that they're misspent so much so
exactly.
Okay, maybe had we got it through our thick skulls like 3 or 4 years in, that would have been great.
Exactly. You could wonder all day what would have happened if I'd left early or if I'd made a decision sooner or something like that. But the reality is that I'm not sure that I believe so much anymore in wasted time. I think that whatever you end up doing with your hour, your day, your month, your year, maybe there's a handful of things that really are a waste of time. But I think so often maybe you need whatever time that may be to either relax, recover, to try something new out, to get something wrong, fail faster so that you can figure out what it is you're meant to be doing. So many things. So I don't know where I'm going with that really, but just many things I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, it was actually the other train when I was saying, oh, my brain's going in so many directions as we brought up that notion of childhood and identity. This was the other path, like exactly. And maybe this gets a little too heavy, but there is also another portion of it a little bit with what kind of society built us up to expect that we had to do, and not in the sense of the have to do with a capital H maybe, but what you see around yourself is what you then realize is possible. You don't see an artist actually making a living, right? There's so much of the social conversation around starving artist, and that becomes then acceptable, right? That becomes like, oh, that just must be the way it is. So if I want to make a living for my art, I'm going to have this other job. I have to have financial support some other way. And yes, that can sometimes be true, but maybe it also doesn't have to be. The only reason I had an idea of starting my own business, aside from the fact that I graduated from university in 2009 and it was the recession and all of that. But I actually spent a year in the UK, which is a whole nother subject when I tell you that I lived in Newcastle for a year.
Wow.
Yeah. But I worked with full-time artists and we were working with at-risk 8 to 12-year-olds. But for the first time in my life, I was seeing people who were woodworkers and musicians and painters and ceramicists, that's what they did. And they wanted to work with the kids that we were working with in the Walker neighborhood. But first and foremost, they were practicing artists.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like all of a sudden, oh, hold on a second. You can do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I am one of the incredibly fortunate people in life, in the respect that my mum's catchphrase was, you can be whatever you want to be. My mum's not with us anymore. My dad he was the guy who, his kind of ethos was, look, I'll take care of the tough stuff so that you can go and do what you want to do. He supported each of me and my 3 sisters. He supported each of us in various ventures, whether it was, for me, it was university, for my sisters, it was other things. Supported us so that we could go and do our things. My mum and dad were super, super, like ridiculously hardworking in non-creative jobs. They said the right things, but what was what I think what was important for me, or what I was really grateful that they said all of those things. At least I didn't have any opposition, but I also didn't have anyone showing me how it was done. And that's not their fault. I mean, crikey, if they could have done, I'm sure they would have done. But you're absolutely right. We're not often held up, artists of any kind, as an example of how to go about life. Artists are seen as the outliers, the people who accidentally get it right or don't get it right because they die in obscurity or something. Historically, these are the stories that you hear about, or troubled souls who don't do so well. And I've come to realize that's absolutely wrong. And there's a couple of things I need to remember to say here. The first thing is, I don't know what education looks. It's a long time since I was in a classroom of any kind. But one thing I would say, if there's any educators listening to this, I had some wonderful teachers and some wonderful education from school right through to university. The one thing that was never spent any serious time on was careers advice. We had a couple of windows in my entire education where we were allowed to speak to a careers advice. There was very little when I finished uni, and this might have changed by now, but I suspect it probably hasn't. We spent 3 years learning how to make music and how to make guitars sound nice and how to write songs and stuff. There wasn't a point at which any practical application was given to us. This is now what you go and do with it. I'm probably exaggerating to say there wasn't a point. There was maybe a smattering of ideas the time we were there, but there wasn't really any aftercare with that. We were released into the world. Okay, you're musicians now, good for you. And then the doors closed behind you and it's, so I don't know what to do now. And we've kind of just had to figure it out. That's not meant as a complaint. If anyone is listening who is influential in those circles, help artists by giving advice. Even if you are an artist and you know someone who you think would benefit from a bit of a pep talk or a bit of practical advice, then please do, because we don't get that when we're growing up. Really, there's no obvious career path. The other thing, and this for anyone who's in any doubt about whether the thing you want to do is viable or not. And bear in mind, I'm speaking as someone who only, in the scheme of things, recently left my quite well-paying job to do things which as yet have not made me a millionaire. But Cara used to say, when at the point where I was thinking about leaving my job and I knew that I had to go, if we were out in the car somewhere for the day, we were driving up the motorway, she would do this thing where she would point out lorries, trucks that were passing us with weird businesses on the side of them. For some reason, the one that always comes to mind is there was like industrial pipe cleaning service, and it was this guy's name and his phone number and stuff. And there would be, if you spend enough time on big roads, maybe to get the car out if it's safe to do this wherever you are right now, and just go up a couple of junctions on the motorway and have a look at the things that you will see on the sides of people's trucks. People make livings out of weird stuff. And that's great.
I do this in the city. I do this in Chicago. There's actually a rather sizable storefront across the street from the community ceramic studio I go to in the middle of Chicago. That's a psychic. That's what they are. When I think about what the cost of that real estate must be, I'm thinking if they can afford to live in the middle of Lincoln Square on a major street, it's not necessarily the quote unquote high street, but it's still a major foot traffic and all this kind of stuff. If they can afford the rent or the mortgage or whatever to be there, and I've never seen a soul walk into the place, then I can figure this out.
Absolutely. I mean, that's it. That's it right there. Amen to that. I've got nothing to add there. That's the thing. It's a state of mind, isn't it? I think I've blamed the examples that we get to see as we're growing up and maybe not getting the right advice along the way. Whatever the reason, artists find it hard to find their way. But I think a lot of it starts with self-belief. And I think only at the point where you go, do you know what? I'm doing this. I'm not going to worry anymore about. And I realize that I'm oversimplifying for if someone is not in a situation where they are yet able to pay the bills or feed themselves and their cats or whatever. I get that life is not necessarily as simple as being able to say, to hell with it, I'm going to dedicate my life to this now. But at some point when you're able to take the chance you're not going to get good at doing the thing until you start doing it. And for me, I had to realize that I was spending a lot of my life worrying about what if, nowhere near enough time taking the risks. And you just, at some point, you got to take the training wheels off, I think.
And I always walk through myself, okay, go down the route of the what ifs. What if I quit my job and I try to launch this thing and nobody likes it and it fails?
Yeah.
What if that happens? Okay, worst case scenario. I don't have any money. I'm broke. I have to move back in with my parents. I realize I come from a massive place of privilege and that I'm a few hours away from the majority of my family members. So no one's going to let me become destitute or anything like that. And
likewise.
So really what we're talking about is a massive round of embarrassment, but, and maybe some credit card debt if you're not careful.
Yeah.
But aside from that, once you go down that path of what if, we're not talking about, hey, I want to become a professional rock climber, so I'm just going to go out and free climb right now. That what if situation is death. Like that's that's a whole different place. But the what if situation is, okay, I've got to go back to being a barista and making people coffee at 4:00 in the morning. Which is what I did to start my business in the first place. Yeah, it's not great. I definitely don't want to do that. I managed to do that when I was 24 and somehow survive off 4 or 5 hours of sleep. And I don't think I can do that now 10 years later by any means, but there are options, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is probably true of, there's always exceptions. I realize some people will have it harder for whatever reason, but I think that's probably true of more people than it is not true for. And I was thinking, because it's been just over a year since I discovered that my old job wasn't going to exist, and I made the decision to walk away from it and finally get on with being me again. And it took me a long time. I was still fearful because I'd been so used to earning a certain amount. We didn't have a yacht. We weren't crazy rich or anything like that. But it's the investments industry. The wages were good. I've been doing it for a long time. We had some stuff saved up, and I had really good pension and security and things like that. That stuff was really hard to walk away from. Cut to a year later, and I've now been divorced from that for long enough that I thought, okay, so if this doesn't work out, if the things that I'm doing right now, if it doesn't come to pass, if Young Martyrs doesn't earn enough for me to live from, if my book doesn't sell, if my book never gets finished, if any of the things that I'm doing, if they don't work out, that's okay, because actually now I'm not in the world I was in previously. I've got more choices. I could go and, just to help pay the rent, or the mortgage, I should say, I could go and get a job in a music shop. And this is the funniest thing. I'm thinking about going from quite a heavy duty career to thinking about getting a Saturday job in a music shop. And suddenly at 37, I'm going, oh man, I get to work in a music shop. This is amazing. And for a moment, I got so carried away that the car actually I do a lot of thinking out loud. I get quite excited. And she had to say, don't forget, that's fine, but that's your plan B. You're supposed to be doing these things. Don't get too sidetracked by this part-time job you just invented.
You don't actually have an offer for.
Exactly. So anyway, I guess my point is that we can generally survive much more easily than we think. We tell ourselves, we set expectations for ourselves, financially in particular, that are very hard to meet sometimes, and that can be a real diversion from the stuff that's much, much more important, and that we could actually be surviving with if we took the chance. So that's been my thought process recently.
Oh, I really want to dig more into what you just said, even just as far as the expectations and financially. But I also realized we've spent 3/4 of an hour solving all the world's problems on arts education and haven't actually talked about the band.
At least the world is saved, so now they can all listen to the band's music.
Perfect, exactly. I do want to get to it because I am fascinated to learn how in the world you brought together a band and recorded an album while partially in lockdown during chunks of those time and during this global pandemic we're all still experiencing.
Good question. It wasn't easy, as you might expect. I think the first thing to say would be that as we are all on some level jobbing musicians, as we would say in the UK, we, on one level or another, each of us play instruments and are paid for it, or it forms part of our work or something like that. We've had in our back pocket that if need be, the four of us are allowed to be closer at our discretion. I should point out, when we first started playing together, we weren't in a heavy lockdown. We were still social distancing. We were still washing our hands and stuff, but we weren't at that point in lockdown. Shops were open. This is some point last summer we first got together. But the truth of it was, we all felt very awkward about it, so we didn't come anywhere near each other. We found rehearsal, we talked about it, we theorized. It was like, yeah, okay, we can do this. And the reality was that we were all very uncomfortable. Each of us know people who are more vulnerable. Each of us in our private lives were taking it super seriously. We were all wearing masks. We were all, just being adults about it. And so when we got together, we were trying to find spaces that had big enough rooms that we had the space, and we would meet. If we weren't playing instruments, we'd try and meet outside. Mostly we managed to do that. Also over here in the UK, there's been, I don't want to get into a whole pandemic thing and politics, but the guidelines haven't always been that clear. I don't know if it's the same everywhere else in the world. Imagine it is.
That's an understatement for the US, but we'll just gloss over that.
Yeah, so we had the situation where we're trying to stay apart, but then rehearsal studios for bands, for some periods they were open and they were allowed to be. For some periods they weren't, and there were some periods where they couldn't decide whether they should or shouldn't be. So some were open and some were not open. But we went by the philosophy, if it's legal, then we can do it. It's just up to us to not get too close. And I take my word for it when I say we really were taking it seriously. The weirdest thing for me, because a band is like a family. I was in a band, Centerfolds, for a long time before this band, and we love each other. Our families are like each other's families. We're still very close even now, even though the band disbanded some time ago. And to go through the process of creating something special and personal and intimate as music and the album that we put together, and not once to have even to have shaken hands or high-fived or hugged. I'm a hugger. And I think there may have been a couple of times where we touched elbows, because that was a thing for a while. I still don't know if that's allowed anymore, but I think maybe we touched elbows a couple of times through the whole of last year, but we managed to make an album.
Have the chemistry and the vibe, and you feed off of each other, and as you're playing, to see the reactions and to engage with each other, and how much that can contribute to the sound and what you're producing. Like, I just can't even wrap my head around it.
I think there was something of a gift, and I don't mean to gloss over obviously the horrendous loss and suffering that the virus has caused, but I think some of the effects that last year had in terms of giving us perhaps fewer daily distractions. There's been plenty in the news to distract us, I get that, but in terms of your everyday life, because you don't have to, certainly for a lot of us, didn't have to get up at crazy o'clock to sit in traffic for an hour, 2 hours to get to an office, to, all of these things. Most people were working from home, at least to some degree. We had a lot more time to be introspective, and I think as a band, one favor that did for us was we saw those rehearsals and the writing sessions as kind of therapy. We really needed to be in the room together. And so we weren't getting there and already thinking about what time is this going to finish because I'm tired and I've got a meeting the next morning and things. So we really gave time to it. So we tried to, each time we would take food and drinks, and we would treat it like a social, albeit one where we had to stand apart, but we would really give our time to it. And I think that's been a big lesson to me, is that if you love something and you would like it to be a part of your future, you can't run away from it. You have to accept that it is going to be a part of your life, and you have to give it the time and the care that it deserves, and that's something that I think we were able to do. And we did all know each other anyway, but this has certainly made us much closer. And the album that we made, we were all just beyond pleased with it. We put we gave it such care. We made the decision that if we're going to do this, and particularly it was such an effort to bring it all together, because for all the obvious reasons, because of lockdown, because even as far as our moods, there was several times when we didn't know when someone in the band was going to have a job necessarily in a couple of months, or, there's among the band and our partners, we have a lot of self-employed people who weren't able to do their jobs and things like that. So to find the energy to do it, it felt at times like it wasn't going to be possible, but we just said, you know what, we love this, so let's commit to it. Let's just do it. If we overthink it, it won't happen. If I'd said in the beginning, it's going to be difficult to do this because there's a pandemic, people won't even be interested, because at the point where we're likely to get the album out, it might be near Christmas, and people are focused on other things. And that is what happened in the end. If I'd have thought that in the beginning, I'd have talked myself out of doing it. We just never would have done it. And by just saying, do you know what? No more planning, no more worrying. Let's go and make something that we love and just trust that it will fall into place. And it did, and it's still growing. It's still very early days. We still need all the help that we can possibly get in terms of, if you've heard the album and you like it, then please tell your friends, whatever, all of that. I'm learning to be a better promoter all the time, which is, as I said, it doesn't come naturally to me, but it happened because we got out of our own way and just committed to doing it, and that's what's made the difference.
I don't know if this is our lizard brains or the human condition, and you guys can dig through this on your own podcast another time maybe, but it's so easy to come up with all the reasons of why not to do something, right? Why it won't work, and why it's not the right time, or what about this, what about that? And yet, more often than not, if we pause for a second, then usually you can look at every single one of those reasons and flip it on its head and say, okay, but there's X, Y, and Z that could work, or
absolutely. Who
cares if those happen? What does it matter? Because you're still doing the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so easy to talk yourselves out of something, and I think that's, if we're to be generous about that, it's survival. We're protecting ourselves, but you can be overprotective, and I think that's the thing that stops a lot of artists of any kind getting to where they want to be. And I have been that person for a really long time, so.
But now the album is out. This is where you got to do the pitch. Lean in hard on the promoting.
I got this. So the album, the debut album and the self-titled album by Young Martyrs can be found on all of your favourite music players. So you can find us on Spotify, on Apple Music, on iTunes. Your Alexa device will play Young Martyrs. You can get it on SoundCloud and a whole heap of ones I haven't even heard of, actually. So it's live, it's there, you can find it. The only difficult thing for some is Martyrs. Some people have struggled with the spelling, but we are called Young Martyrs, Martyrs.
Perfect.
Did I spell that? I had to check myself now. I'm pretty sure I did.
I'll put it in the show notes. Don't worry. Just click the link in the show notes. Don't worry about spelling it.
I can spell, I promise. I don't know. I just had a bit of a moment there. I was so carried away with my own sales pitch.
I love it. I love it. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, definitely everybody check it out in the show notes. Cara's also got a fantastic playlist for all of us, our ceramicists, in terms of what mood you're in the studio to check out. And I did peep that there are some Young Martyrs songs on there. So if you want to mix it up with a few different things, she's got that there too. So thank you so much, Tom, for all of your time. I think we need 3 more episodes to cover all the various topics we brought up, because there's some heavy-hitting stuff here that I think is going to be really amazing.
Honestly, Rebecca, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. It has been a genuinely really fun conversation, and happy to go down any of those rabbit holes in the future with you. Just give me a shout.
And with that, we finish episode 111 of The Maker's Playbook. Clearly, Tom and I talked a lot about all of those big life questions we as makers and artists are faced with. So don't forget, if you're going back and forth wondering about the right decisions for starting your own business, be sure to grab my free PDF The Savvy Owner's Quick Guide to Smart Decisions at the link in the show notes. This guide will empower you to make decisions that are best for your life, rather than being left to sort through the generic, well-meaning advice from people online who may or may not have similar circumstances to you. Grab it at makers-playbook.com/guardrails. That's makers-playbook.com/guardrails, or just click in the link in the show notes. As always, if you're enjoying the Maker's Playbook, it would be incredibly helpful if you subscribe to the show and review your favorite episode on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. Double points if you share about it on Instagram, and be sure to tag us at the Maker's Playbook if you do so I can share your account to our audience as well. Until next week, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Together, we've got this.